Hello, and welcome to another episode of my Singularity Let's Play series. This is Northstar. I hope you're well, are taking care of each other, and being kind to yourselves. For those new to my channel, welcome. Returning viewers, welcome back. New viewers, you should know I'm disabled long COVID. It affects my cognition. I don't always think the most quickly. I can lose track of my thoughts. I apologize. Nothing I can do, but this is a terrible disease. And honestly, it places my life at risk, not only from things like increased risk of heart attack, but because the government is trying to fight my SSI claim, or rather, they rejected the reconsideration, which they do 86% of the time. I think we explained before, it could be a missing form caused them to reject the initial application, a technical denial. It could be that the reconsideration people only know it's a reconsideration. They can't see why it was rejected before, and so they just figure um, that the medical reasoning must not be good enough or something. But it's bullshit. I can barely manage. I've been looking back at my history of YouTube production, which is what I spend almost all my time on, and I manage. It looks like actually, though, there have been better and worse times. Especially now living on my own, not with family, I manage barely 2 hours of recording a day on average. Some days, usually it's in spurts, but there are days where it's almost nothing, days where it's more. But I that's not enough to hold down any job, and that's not enough to support myself. So it's bullshit. SSI is full of shit, or Social Security is full of shit, and they're just trying to refuse to help. So I think there may be an element of targeting me because of my political beliefs. I wouldn't have thought that before the Trump administration, but Trump is freaking evil, and he's been deporting people because of their political beliefs. So, um, I could believe that he's messing with Social Security. He's also been purging people in Social Security administration and trying to line everyone up to his worldview. So, and he's also talked about a nephew, I think it was, who has a disabled kid. Why doesn't he just let that disabled kid die? So, I believe he'd want, especially adults, being even less sympathetic. Even though I was disabled by the coronavirus virus that, well, Trump played a role in not being adequately responded to. Of course, that would touch on his ego and make him all the more eager to kill off those long COVID. Anyways, we'll see. The coming changes, the grid rules, could actually maybe even benefit me because one of the things they're saying, based on your age and education, we think you could adapt to other work. It's like age and education has nothing to do whatsoever with my very, very limited energy. Now I can only work like 2 hours a day. That's not helped by age or education. They don't help me be able to find a job that works with that because no jobs work with that. No jobs can pay the insanely high hourly rate that you could support yourself off so little work, and really anything shy of very sporadic gig work is not going to be willing to tolerate that level of things with complete schedule flexibility. The only things that would even tolerate that in the beginning, first place, and that those would not be able enough to form a substantial gainful activity that is to reasonably support oneself. Anyway, so I have to go before an administrative law judge. Now, more than half of people who get to that point, the administrative law judge, win. So the odds are technically in my favor, but I've always been unlucky, so I'm not counting on anything other than the government being absolute shit to me and trying to kill me off, as I said. Because, well, the evil lies at the heart of the system, capitalism. Why we treat those who can't make the rich richer so poorly. System is, by the way, not about individual enterprise and free markets, whatever crap. That's the propaganda the billionaires want you to believe. Capitalism is about a handful of people who own most of the capital getting richer and richer and richer and richer off other people's labor. For them being fortunate enough to own businesses, to own stocks and bonds, to be in position to lend money. It's basically just a continuation of usury and the money lenders of biblical times that were condemned in the Bible. That's what capitalism really is. Uh, the money might not be lent to others always. It may sometimes be essentially capital you're lending to your workers, tools that are needed to get stuff produced, but it's really just a continuation of usury. that's that's the irony of this. People act like it's so new, but and you especially see Christians trying to support capitalism. It's like, do you support usury? Because the Bible specifically condemns it. And that's what this is. The billionaires are doing usury to the rest of society, where they can, instead of loans, they control capital. It's pretty much the same thing, though. But never count on people who can profit off the evil to call it out for what it is. A lot of the religious leaders align with the right, even though Jesus would have been a leftist if he were around today. I mean, more than spirit, physically around. He would be undoubtedly a leftist. Let's see. Humans, there we go. Now we can do Neolithic. It's like something's missing. What is missing? Some of the stuff from Bronze Age and such increases the simulation speed. Some of the unlocks appear, like ziggurats and stuff, pyramids. I don't remember if Iron Age has anything similar. I think. Yep, the Great Wall increases simulation speeds. That benefits entropy as well. Even if I'm going for entropy upgrades mainly, want that. All right. Nui, castles, etc., etc., etc. And Age of Exploration. Scientific Revolution. Biology. It's a key tech in Civilization 4, which, by the way, I have a Let's Play series of, and you should check out. I have one series right now, which is my Greek Archipelago game, but I will be doing other ones with different mods and different civs, different maps, different leaders sooner or later. So it's a very repeatable game. Some people play nothing but Civ, and some people probably watch nothing but Civ. And in my opinion, Civ 4 is the pinnacle of the series, though Civ 6, it's going to be unpopular opinion, is better than Civ 5. A lot of people like 5 for being more streamlined, but there's nothing to do in the late game of Civ 5, from what I understand. And Civ 6 did soothe over some of the problems with 1 unit per tile a little. So, let's see. Grab a bunch of these things. A bunch of these. And some upgrades to cause that stuff to kick in. Boom, 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 boom. Sometimes you just gotta manually go down to them. You need to have lots of generators. I think it's got like 3-digit numbers of things I want to grab. There. All right. Get a substantial number of metabits and knowledge. I'm going to reset it very quickly, but I'd like to be able to buy at least one upgrade. It says it takes time here to save up enough for mold or alcohol. I should go for mold next. chances of staying in the top 250 there are kind of low. There's too many people to snipe. There's 17 hours left. But maybe not going to happen without progressing a lot further and then consolidating my lead with getting the cheapest stuff like a whole bunch of fungal living and fungal cleaners. First mold though. Nasty stuff once indoors. Actually, the average age of housing in the United States is quite old, so there's a lot of mold problems in U.S. housing. So we just don't replace housing. You actually get, interestingly, well, billionaires trying to shape consumer habits to further their own goals, obviously. And you see this with, like, writing about in Japan, where people insist on replacing housing very regularly, and they see it as a disposable commodity. We need to change that. Why? Well, trying to make it culturally acceptable to get Japanese people to also live in, housing where the average age of the building is over 35 years, like it is in the U.S. And there's mold problems and stuff. Uh, right now, that's completely culturally unacceptable in Japan. It's considered necessary to regularly replace buildings. uh Maybe a little too necessary, kind of like the way they approach milk there, where they won't buy milk if it's like more than a day old since it came from the cow or something. But it does prevent people being crammed into these really really old housing units with lots of mold, because that'd be completely culturally unacceptable. And so there'd be more support if people are poor enough that that might be necessary for them to be able to have the resources to afford better. And also, the government would more likely condemn buildings that wouldn't be condemned in, say, the US. Yeah, but the billionaires want to shape the consumer habits of the Japanese to be more amenable to their interests. They want to shape everything. The goal is to have society serve them and only them. Never forget that. Billionaires are not your friends. Um, Capitalism is not your friend either. That system, which is why we have billionaires, not because, capitalism generates wealth. No, because capitalism siphons wealth from the workers to a tiny upper class, i.e., the billionaires. Socialism actually generates more wealth than capitalism, not less. If you're considering how much wealth the system generates, you look at the GDP per capita growth rates per year, the long term rates, not just averaging, because if a system crashes repeatedly, the recovery from those crashes will mean that yearly growth rates so be higher than the real average growth rates, the long term ones. Like, I always give this example. If you have a system that goes every year, grows 50%, 100% in size, and then loses half its value, and does this over and over and over, it hasn't gained 20 years in there, it hasn't gained a single bit of GDP from where it started. It's exactly in the same place. But annual average growth rates will be 50%. If you just average the plus 100 minus 50 over and over. So yeah, the USSR, for instance, actually had a higher long-term GDP per capita growth rate than any country on Earth except for Japan and at times France. They also had the highest level of income equality on Earth except for Sweden. So yeah, they were not number one in either income inequality or GDP per capita growth rates, but they were very, very, very high in both. Which is good enough to say that yes, socialism does generate more wealth than capitalism. Unfortunately, the Soviet Union started off with much, 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 much less wealth than the U.S., and even though it was generating wealth comparatively faster, because money makes money, so it may have been generating less in absolute terms, but more relative to how much it had. It didn't last long enough to catch up, and it would have taken a very long time because the Russian Empire, when it collapsed into the Soviet Union, was probably 300 years behind the United States. It was so much less developed. But anyways, where was I? Yeah, billionaires aren't your friends. Capitalist system which siphons the wealth of workers into the pockets of a very, very few and creates billionaires and multimillionaires instead of having everyone being moderately wealthy and having actually more wealth in society overall. Um, and it's not just because there's a variety of reasons this is accomplished, by the way. Because socialism, if you just look at how efficiently an individual investment tends to be, how efficient individual investments tend to be under capitalism, socialism, they're less efficient in socialism. So you would think it generates less wealth, but that's inaccurate because there's a lot of things that aren't being accounted for. Three or four things in particular. One is synergy. So let's say you're investing in heavy industry, as the Soviet Union did to a very high degree in its economy. Capitalism will invest in heavy industry. If, let's say, the capitalist economy would be tend to grow its heavy industrial sector, would tend to grow it in a way that would not benefit other sectors of the economy as much as a socialist system would. So if you just look at the gains in terms of output of the heavy industrial sector, you will lead to thinking there's a bigger difference in efficiency there is. The capitalism has more advantage than it does in investments. Because because, I'm talking about, I should say, centrally planned socialism. When you have things are centrally planned, you can plan the growth of a economic sector to benefit other sectors as well, to achieve the greatest total good, which includes not just good to other industrial sectors, but good to the population. You can make sure the industries meet human needs rather than just maximize profits, make things that people need rather, and I'll give you an example of something that produces a lot of GDP in theory, but doesn't benefit human well-being in any way. When farms produce food, and then because they can't sell it at a high enough price to profit, such as during recessions, this is very common, they'll destroy the food. I mean, during the pandemic, you had farms dumping out milk on the ground. During the Great Depression, there were oranges that were burned. This is a repeating motif in capitalism. You have hungry people and you have food being destroyed. So industries are not producing for the greatest human good. And they're not always even producing what people need. Sometimes they're producing things people don't need at all while important needs are unmet. Because if they can manage to and I don't mean just like it's a little luxury. I mean, sometimes they'll produce more of a given good that can be sold because they're trying to break in, because, a company's trying to break into a sector that they have failed to break into. Or they could also overestimate future demand. There are a lot of reasons, but they may be producing something that's not even going to be used. While at the same time, again, there's needs that aren't being met at all. So yeah, a century planned socialist economy can coordinate with other industries. It can coordinate with human need. It can coordinate to make sure that supply and demand are better matched. The claim that supposedly free markets coordinate supply and demand better is nonsense. And stuff like the destruction of food during recessions is a great example of that. If the market was perfect at coordinating supply and demand, that food wouldn't have even been grown. If there was enough demand, if it's the most efficient thing for people to not have money to buy food, then you at very least would have had farmers not produce that milk or those oranges in the first place, instead of producing them and wasting time and energy producing those things, labor, and then destroying them, such as again during the Great Depression and during the COVID recession, where oranges and milk respectively were destroyed. Those are just some of the most famous foods that were destroyed. There are a lot of different things. Or grocery stores intentionally destroying things that are still edible that they can't sell just because they don't want homeless people eating it. There's just, either that food should have never been produced in the first place, or it should have been given to the homeless person who needed it. It's wasted effort to produce something only to destroy it. And that's proof that the market is the perfect best way to meet to coordinate supply and demand. That's a load of crap, and you can see it with the things that get produced and destroyed very easily. Oh, I should be doing the basic fungi there. Um, but I'm not done. If it was just that wouldn't be nearly enough to make socialism actually grow faster. There's another thing: consumptive efficiency. So it's not just a matter of making sure things are produced that are produced are actually used, um, and coordinating industries to other industries. There's a general principle of diminishing returns when it comes to a person's standard of living. $1 million benefits a millionaire. Someone already has, let's say, $10 million all less, and it benefits, a homeless person who gave him $1 million. And I'm sure people say something about, oh, drug use, whatever. No, there are people homeless who are very responsible and they got screwed by a system. I might become homeless because of my long COVID, leaving me unable to work, and the system trying to deny me Social Security. You give me $1 million, I would absolutely manage it correctly. In fact, what little I have, I've managed extremely well. Otherwise, I'd probably already be homeless. I'm very, very, very good with money. But we're not just talking about carefully managing the money. It would make a much bigger difference in the life of that homeless person or almost homeless person, maybe, uh, than in the life of a millionaire in terms of the amount of suffering alleviated, the amount of joy brought. So, socialism can actually invest a larger percentage of its resources in economic growth, even though the individual investments are less efficient, because it doesn't have to dedicate as many resources to standard of living. It can put fewer resources in standard of living, but because the resources are distributed more evenly, it's not because socialism is a quality of outcomes or bullshit. It's not. But because there's no billionaires siphoning money off the workers and they're getting paid a larger percent of the value they produce, some is still set aside for growth. Um, because there's no, you know, billionaire living high and mighty off of the, labor of Amazon warehouse workers kind of thing. The Amazon workers are getting paid the value they produce under social system. Um, you can dedicate a larger absolute amount of resources to economic growth, uh, while still having people actually be happier than under a capitalist system, happier with less being spent on standard living because it's being spent on people where, each dollar goes a lot further because you're giving more money to the poor and less to the rich under socialism. And you're giving it because they deserve that, because they produced the value and you're just not stealing it from them, which capitalism steals value. It steals the fruits of the labor from the workers. You get fucking trolls saying, oh no, that's socialism. No. What do you think stock dividends are? They're money you receive for owning stock, not for doing any labor whatsoever. And where does that money come from? It comes from the workers of the company. Necessarily, they have to be paid less so that there's money available to pay stock dividends. Stock dividends are the simplest proof of what I'm talking about. Another proof is if, let's add another layer to this. Let's say you own stock in a bank, and the bank is lending money at interest. So rather than the bank itself employing laborers who are exploited, the bank exploits the labor of, say, the small businesses it makes loans to. And small businessmen have to work harder because there's interest on the loan. It's not just a, no interest. Here's money to start an industry. The banks will charge as much interest as they can get away with without, someone going to a different bank. So, stocks, bonds, loan interest, all these things take money out of the hands of ordinary people and give it to the very rich who get less benefit from that money. Therefore, you need to invest more total money into the standards of living. If you, let's say, you watch my Alpha Centauri Let's Play series, you need to have higher total psych spending under a free market than under planned. Not in the game, but that's how it works in real life. If there was a debuff to psych output under free market, that would be realistic. If you don't watch Malthus' entire series, don't know that game, you have no idea what I'm talking about. Psych is basically the spending on standards of living, but also things like parks and like clinical psychologists for people who need it and so forth. It's called psych because it represents anything that improves the psychology of the populace, which can vary because you could be playing as religious nut jobs or scientists or hedonists, uh, capitalist hedonists, the Morganites. And so what that represents differs by faction. So it's just called psych. It might be fancy churches if you're playing as the believers, for instance. Either way. And so using an analogy, you can have less total outlays and you can think of it as a multiplier on money spent on standard of living, which enables you to put less in and put more into economic growth. But we're not done here. I've already discussed more equitable distribution of resources align higher total investment, coordination. There's also the element of long-term planning. Capitalism is inherently short-sighted. Central planners can look further down the road. Now, technically, a corporation can try and plan long-term, but in the eat or be eaten world of capitalism, you may be forced to do things that are short-term beneficial, long-term harmful, or otherwise you won't last to reap the benefits of long-term stuff. Whereas the planners in the socialist economy can absolutely do the long-term best thing. So more of a long-term perspective, coordination between industries, higher total investment economic growth due to higher consumptive efficiency. And workers tend to work harder when they're paid higher wages. That's probably the biggest final piece of the puzzle, though there's others. When workers are paid relatively higher wages, and so wages in the Soviet Union were lower than the U.S. because it was a less developed country, but they were higher than in comparably developed countries. You look at any other country with a similar GDP per capita, and the real wages would tend to be lower. Not always. The Soviet Union would be near the top of the list, but not at the very top, which it probably should have been better. But the Trotskyists would make a criticism here of the party elites, and they'd probably be right that the party elites in the Soviet Union led to wages not being quite as high as they should be, but still better than capitalism, broadly speaking, better than 9 out of 10 capitalist countries. At a similar GDP per capita, wages tend to be higher. People work harder when they know that they're going to reap more of the benefits. Ironically, the argument that's sometimes made against socialism that people won't work hard if they don't personally benefit from it is actually an argument for socialism because people don't personally benefit from their hard work under capitalism. Your boss benefits from your hard work. You don't. If you're not self-employed and you work hard, all you do is generate more profit for your boss. Under capitalism, under socialism, if you work harder, you get paid more. The boss might give you a portion of the extra value you produce under capitalism based on no obligation to provide you all of it, and he won't. Under socialism, the government is ideologically bound to, and because the government is under a functional socialist system elected by the masses, under a less functional socialist system like the Soviet Union, the party elites still tended to be ideologically. It varied. There were more corrupt elites, but many of them were believers in the socialist system until near the very end when they lost faith. And so, for ideological reasons, they would do it. The party elites. I mean, party elites were selected for their ideological loyalty. They weren't selected, just because they're ruthless or something. Like in capitalism, where the billionaires tend to be most ruthless. They did tend to be a little more ruthless than the average person, to say the least. But the only thing that really selected for the most ruthless people were the secret police, obviously, in the Soviet Union, which tend to be very ruthless. And they weren't actually party elites per se, but they had a similar level of privilege to them. But accepting the secret police, the leaders of the country tended to be ideologues, not just ruthless, greedy son of a bitches. And In a true socialist democracy, not the Soviet way of doing things, democracy functions. There are no billionaires to corrupt the democracy like there are in the US. And so workers make sure that they get the value they produce. Either way, the outcome was high wages in the Soviet Union relative to some more developed capitalist countries. And in a better socialist system, that outcome would be even more true. People under socialism make more of the value they produce. They keep more of it. And this isn't just bullshit hand waving. These things are quantified in the United States. If you work an average job in the United States, some people are self-employed, others aren't. But I think this excludes the self-employed. If excluding the self-employed part of the population, I believe, if you look at an average job, between 45 and 55% of the value you produce will be taken by your boss. Different ways of quantifying this come up with slightly different estimates. So it's around half. You have a system that gives you 80 or 70 or 90% of the value you produce, which is what socialism does. You're going to be motivated to work harder because if you produce an extra $10 of value, you get to keep $7 of it, not 5. That's a motive to work harder. And people did work harder in socialism. There were slackers and they got a lot of attention. The Soviets tried to discourage it. And when things were, when people were prosperous, they tended to less work hard just because they didn't feel the, threat of poverty, of homelessness breathing down their back. Also, housing was subsidized, as was healthcare and education. When necessities were subsidized and people were generally prosperous and there was a shortage of luxury goods, the really expensive things they could spend some extra money on, then yes, people weren't necessarily as hardworking then. But these things weren't always the case. Earlier in Soviet history, there was more of a threat of not being able to adequately survive. Part of what weakened the Soviet Union is they started to grow soft towards the end as things became better developed, more prosperous. Like many empires throughout history, they tend to fall apart as they suffer from an excess of success. The United States is suffering from that now, except ordinary people are suffering and struggling. The people who are becoming soft are the billionaires at the top, who are becoming incredibly detached from ordinary people, not realizing how much they depend on them. And taking a let them eat cake will just oppress them approach. I don't know, maybe you don't consider that soft. I do. But they're not also, the people at the very top are not nearly as innovative as in the past. Ordinary people are still quite innovative, but I had the privilege, if you call it that, of spending time around some people from very wealthy backgrounds who are often engaged in very ivory tower pursuits in academia, and they didn't give a shit really about results. They just wanted to mess around in a laboratory or a library or whatever. And because of their upper class backgrounds, they could often count on getting funding for this and getting positions that allow them to get funding for this. Because it's not like they got research grants, but they would tend to have advantages, legs up in hiring and stuff that weren't based purely on the meritocracy of research history you would expect. I also spent time at other institutions where things were much more meritocratic. So I don't mean to say it's that way everywhere, but there are places, elite universities, where just knowing the right people and such can give you a leg up. God, now I sound too much like a Trumper or something. Yes, there's legitimate reasons people resent the elites in the country. That being said, the real problem is the billionaires, not people like this. But I saw a lot of very complacent academics that as long as they could get their grant money, they didn't care if they produced results, and they certainly didn't care if anything they produced helped people. That's not the 0.1% that's the billionaires, but that is people of the top 10% that become complacent and soft under the US. The people are scrounging hard, in the bottom 40% are struggling to survive. They're no less innovative than the past. But poverty tends to make you stupid and less innovative anyways. Um, because, nutrition and stuff like that affect your ability to think creatively. So, I don't know. It's hard to see why a system is failing when you're in it, which is unfortunately a problem the Soviet Union suffered, but tempting to diagnose what's going wrong with the United States. It's difficult and it's easy to make mistakes because, I'm in it and I'm hardly an unbiased observer. Uh, what is clear is regardless of what's uh, going on with the level of innovation or how hard people are working, there's immense amounts of money and ordinary people are suffering hugely despite that because it's all being taken by the people at the top. There isn't poverty because not enough is being produced or people aren't working hard enough anymore. Maybe people are working less hard in the past, but the real reason so much suffering is because the billionaires succeeded in taking everything, everything that isn't nailed down, and much that is. Just look at the destruction of all kinds of public services through privatization. All right, well, maybe I'll have to consolidate this later. You know what? Let's make a nod to that now. And say if I come back to this next 16 hours, it might just be uh, in the early morning, and I don't have time for this for very long. We'll see. All right, well, viewers, I hope you enjoyed this video, and maybe my blathering didn't bother you too much. Till next time, I wish you all the best. Take care of each other, be kind to yourselves. May you always find a guiding star to lead you home. Adieu, and best luck.